Well, hello. Welcome and thank you for joining us with today's live webinar, Doing Good, Leadership Obligation or Opportunity. It's great to see the attendance from around the world, and I hope that everyone's doing well. It's going to be another great webinar, and I know we have lots to learn, so let's get started. The purpose of these webinars is to educate, inspire, empower, of course, global leaders like you to help modernize boards and ultimately make boards more efficient. We thank you for being here. Our expert speakers bring a wide range of current leadership and board-related topics to the table. And shortly, you'll have the privilege to spend some time with global brand expert Ann Barr-Thompson. And she'll reveal why a sustainable mindset and ethos of citizenship are essentials for you as a leader and the boards you serve. My name is Red, event manager for Shaperency and today's webinar moderator. Before we begin, let me introduce you to our webinar host, Shaperency. Shaperency is a user-friendly, cost-effective digital platform with all the features your board needs to thrive. That includes modern digital security, an ever-growing series of board effectiveness measurement tools, and board education partners. Our founder, Ben, is on a mission to make a change and an impact in the board industry, to modernize boards and governance operations and to make them less boring, as he would say. Now, 3 quick notes before we begin. Do write your questions in the Q&A section as we go. Our goal is to answer all the questions before the close of the webinar and the presentation, but if we run out of time, we will follow up with you after the webinar. This webinar is being recorded and you will receive a link to the recording and Ann's presentation deck within the next few days. And lastly, all certification holders of the globally recognized International Board Director Competency Designation, IBDC.D certification, will receive 1 CPE credit for attending this webinar. Now, I'd like to present today's webinar speaker, Ann Barr-Thompson. Her experience and expertise on the topic of doing good is quite fascinating, as you will notice shortly. Ann is a senior executive leader, board member, published author, and award-winning thought leader with more than 25 years of international experience in global brand strategy. She helps leaders cultivate a new consciousness for business and optimize financial and social value, navigating brand development with purpose, sustainability, corporate social responsibility, and political activism. Ann's pioneering research into brand leadership, good citizenship, and brand loyalty influenced the movement around purpose that continues to inform the decisions of corporate and nonprofit leaders today. She is the author of Do Good, Embracing Brand Citizenship to Fuel Both Purpose and Profit. Here is Ann Barr-Thompson and Doing Good, Leadership Obligation or Opportunity. Welcome, Ann, to our virtual stage.
Thank you, Red. It's a pleasure to be here. And thank you, Shaperency, for the opportunity to speak with your members today. Without a doubt, advancing government collaboratively, especially, and promoting fiduciary responsibility and globally engaged shareholders is all about doing good. And it's one of the new models for business that we need as we advance today. Importantly, I wanted to start off by just saying I'm not an activist. I'm actually very much a pragmatist when it comes to this. And I want to take you on a journey to provoke thinking and to have you go back and contemplate how you're interacting with executive management, how you're interacting with a board, with your board, other fellow board members, as you go about today navigating this new landscape we're in. As I speak with executive teams and boards globally, I feel many feel like they're being backed into a corner these days to do good. And most of these people are focused on what's doing right. Very few business leaders I meet wake up in the morning and say, today I'm going to do harm. They're focused on doing their best with the resources they have. Yet at the same time, they're struggling to see activities associated with doing good, and the demands for these activities are growing every day as opportunities for value creation. So today, as we explore this dynamic, I'd like to for you to consider how these are opportunities for value creation and not only costs of running business, not only an obligation. Oh no. There's always a little bit of a tech glitch. There we go. So for many decades, corporate efforts to fund social and environmental programs have been thought of at best as public relations campaigns to boost reputation management and brand reputation. And at worst, they're ways to right wrongs. They've been part of what we think of as a zero-sum game. Do bad, do good to make up for it. And as one participant in research we've conducted aptly stated, big companies ruin communities in places like Africa or China with their factories. They kill local traditions and use up resources. Then they educate a few kids there and feel they've made up for all the bad things they've done. A zero-sum game. However, today, the era of the zero-sum game is completely over. No more can businesses operate in this manner. As the chairman of Tata Sons, and Tata Sons, as you may know, is the holding company for all of Tata companies. 66% of their equity share is held by philanthropic trusts serving a wide variety of different initiatives and programs. And as the chairman has said, big business has obligations, a duty of care to employees, to customers, to communities, and the environment in which we all operate. Business leaders across the globe are recognizing this more and more, that their duty of care to stakeholders is as important, and in some moments, more important than their returning a profit to shareholders. Without a doubt today, business and society are a two-way compact. Yet what this means in practical terms is still being played out. Rather than conceiving of new models, most businesses are still operating in old ways, bolting on new teams to existing departments, adding new tasks to existing groups. It's no wonder people in sustainability, in PR, and all marketing communications and HR functions are burnt out. Their roles within an organization continue to expand and their teams are often shrinking. And we've seen this significantly over the course of the pandemic. Importantly, people's expectations for how businesses run are changing, and the old models, this zero-sum game, must be transformed. As one participant in our research back in 2015, 7 years ago, told us, many companies believe they have responsibility to give back to society. And to me, this is wonderful. In the future, all businesses will have to give to get. All businesses will have to give to get. That's a really big statement, especially coming from 7 years ago, not yesterday. Yet, Russell Reynolds has conducted research, a study that if you haven't seen is worth looking at. It's called Divides and Dividends, Leadership Actions for a More Sustainable Future. And this research found that the driving force behind CEO concerns with sustainability, which we can equate in this instance to doing good, and I'll define how we should think of doing good moving forward in a few moments. Russell Reynolds found that most people in the C-suite and on boards continue to see sustainability as an opportunity they have to have costs around for reputation management. So actually not an opportunity, it's an obligation, rather than looking at it as value creation. And there are great opportunities for value creation and enhancing your reputation, loyalty, and profits when you focus on these things. Importantly, doing good is not a check the box exercise. And as I said before, most of this is falling on people in marketing communications, and PR. Even for those in sustainability and supply chain management, it's not a check the box exercise. Doing good insists on the CEO and board commitment. It requires a holistic mindset. It requires developing a culture that focuses on a sustainability mindset, on considering these things in all your actions, and an ethos of citizenship, on active participation as a member of society. It also requires demonstrating how you're delivering these commitments and creating a positive impact. And I'll discuss a little bit about ESG in a bit, because ESG is one way to do that, but it's important to remember that ESG is not designed as an impact report. It's a risk management tool for investors and investment managers. So what does doing good mean? And we'll use doing good here as an all-encompassing thing. Doing as a noun and good as an adjective. And as I read this, if you want to even span the dictionary online, you'll discover that actually many of these phrases within this definition come from the definition of doing and the definition of good. So doing good is integrated activities in which a company engages to minimize its negative impact and maximize its usefulness, advantageous, or beneficial effect on society and the environment. It's to be obedient to conventions, to the way society is moving, not only regulations and rules, in a way so that your brand is desired, approved of, and commands respect. And it's interesting to discover that words like desired, approved of, and commands respect are part of the definition of good in some instances. I would also like to hear at this moment to talk a little bit about the definition of the word sustainability, because it's also another word that people often put in one context when it actually has a wider context. And sustainability is not just about being green and focusing on the environment, and that's how a lot of companies are viewing it. Sustainability is about delivering the framework in the UN's SDGs and all 17 SDGs. And as most people who have looked at the SDGs know, that framework is quite wide and broad, which makes it difficult sometimes to hone in on how you can go and deliver it. But doing good and sustainability are about a wider focus of activities. And we need to, when we look at them that way, we see them as a potential for opportunity. It's essential for long-term success. And doing good depends upon meeting the needs of an interdependent circle of stakeholders and resources. Investment managers and investors, as I mentioned, have recognized this. And they recognize that behaving responsibly and respecting resources, in other words, doing good, acting sustainably, is essential for long-term success. Probably the best known face within the investment community for this is Larry Fink. And in his latest letter to CEOs, he said, "Our conviction at BlackRock is that companies perform better when they are deliberate about their role in society and act in the interest of their employees, customers, communities, and their shareholders. Act in the interest of a wide set of stakeholders, not only shareholders." Being deliberate about your role in society demands an understanding of an interdependent circle of stakeholders. If we begin with employees as a primary stakeholder, because today employees are a big focus of many businesses, given what in the US at least is known as the Great Resignation, the circle goes something like this. A company that provides its employees with a living wage, treats them fairly, and maintains equitable supplier relationships produces higher quality products and services. And if you think back on it, this is not a new concept. The industrialists all knew this. Many of them at the turn of the 20th century, from the 1800s to the 1900s, invested in housing and things to make their employees happier, to produce better, to produce higher quality. When a company prices its products and services at a fair value based upon quality, lives up to its product claims, and provides excellent customer service, it's likely to sell more than its competitors. When it then innovates its product and service offerings, incorporating and anticipating consumers, its customers' changing needs, it further nurtures loyalty. And loyalty reduces the cost of sales and ultimately increases profits. Increased profits enable a corporation to provide its workforce with better benefits, foster better community relations, improve supply chains, invest more into R&D, and pay out higher returns to investors. And so the cycle begins again with employees. Many people look at this as a virtuous circle. I often like not to call it that because it tends to put it in a spot of doing good in a place that's not as pragmatic. And if you're a business that's focused solely on doing good, not on balancing purpose and profit, then you're a social enterprise and not a profit-making business. Importantly today, the focus on sustainability and pressure on supply chains that's been spotlighted with the Russian aggression in the Ukraine, or the war as I meant to say, is calling for a wider systems perspective of stakeholders than business historically has taken. It's essential to think about society and the environment as stakeholders because Me Too, Black Lives Matter, Greta Thunberg, the war in Ukraine have made activists and more people falling into that activist camp, especially those in Gen Z, which is the upcoming generation into the workforce, think of these things as stakeholders. Society and the environment must be considered as you're looking to craft your responses to what's happening in the world, as well as new activities for the business to create value. Importantly, people now expect companies to respond to a growing, and the list is growing every day, list of social and environmental challenges. And they're calling on brands, which I think of as the human face of a business with which people form a relationship. And that relationship secures preference and loyalty, which secures revenues. People are calling on brands to have higher order purpose that considers all stakeholders. Each time you or a competitor does good, people's views advance. The bar is raised and you'll be required to do better. There's no end game in sight in this right now. The social issues people are giving business permission to and demanding that business respond to continues to widen. As the world grows more turbulent, the pathway to doing good is becoming more and more complex and multifaceted. Potentially, it's existential. We saw this play out as business leaders wrestled with whether or not to maintain operations in Russia and at what level. It was an existential threat. You will inevitably make mistakes along the way, and how you acknowledge and respond to these mistakes will be the difference. I've worked with airlines over the years, international airlines, and we always talk about the recovery program, how they make up for a lost bag. And they can actually gain a more loyal customer in losing a bag. So how do you look at this opportunities to respond after you make a mistake as a way to gain more loyalty, as a way to show people that you acknowledge your humanity and you're not a demigod? And that's a new way of looking at business. More and more humility is coming into play. Considering missteps as opportunities to strengthen trust and demonstrate how you're a learning organization, you listen to your stakeholders, you're interested in feedback and dialogue, not just one-way communication, and improving your actions is a way to cultivate trust. So doing good. I'd like to propose that it's not an opportunity or an obligation. It's both an obligation and an opportunity. And now I'm going to introduce you with this backdrop to the model of brand citizenship. Brand citizenship is a framework for doing good. It's not the only way to do it. It's one way that helps you balance this notion of opportunity and obligation. It's a model that helps to transform corporate and social responsibility, corporate citizenship, sustainability, and things of this nature from costs of doing business into investments into the long-term sustainability and even viability of a business. Without having a goal to develop a framework for social responsibility or purpose, the 5-step framework that spans across what I call a Me to We continuum, and I'll introduce to you in a few moments, came into view through general trend research that had nothing to do with purpose, sustainability, or citizenship. It was a more general set of questions we were asking people at the end of 2011 when the world was being told we were coming out of a recession, but people didn't feel like they were. And at that moment, people told us that business was better suited than government. They had lost their faith in government. This is 10 years ago. Business had lost, that people had lost their faith in government and felt business needed to step in and help progress society. So what we see happening in a big way, what's being spotlighted in the media today with people's demands on business, has been growing for years. And frankly, if we look back at history, it's been a debate that's been going on since the beginning of business. Brand citizenship is a framework that guides companies to strengthen reputation, enhance impact, and increase ROI on activities related to that broader definition of doing good. So you must wonder why the name brand citizenship. So if we return to the definition I gave you earlier, brand, the brand is the human face of a business or a product or service. It's the thing we form a relationship with, and this secures preference and loyalty. Citizenship is the qualities that a person is expected to have as an active participant in society and a responsible member of a community. So it's about the human face of a business being an active participant in society and the communities in which it operates. The Me Too We continuum of brand citizenship begins with purpose as a through line. With this meaningful purpose, it guides companies to move across delivering benefits to individuals, which is, if you look at Peter Drucker's definition of the purpose of a business, to form a customer. But these individuals also include your employees and other stakeholders. So it's about delivering benefits to individuals, and then with purpose as a through line, running across to contribute to society. Every brand has a distinguishable journey across these 5 steps. It's not about mimicking what your best competitor is doing. It's about reflecting your individual culture and the individual nature of how your purpose is transformed across your culture. When the model first started emerging in the research, I thought that contribution was going to be the end all to be all, that every brand had to be thought of as a brand of doing good in the biggest traditional way of thinking about it. But as we started exploring research over 5 years, we discovered that every brand does not need to be thought of that. You need to embrace the elements of being a business that contributes. As an integrative model, the 5 steps are somewhat amorphous, and brands glide back and forth between them. Brand citizenship promotes sustainability mindset and an ethos of citizenship across strategy and operations because it helps to unite, to integrate historically siloed functions in a business. If you think about it, you're parsing out budgets to marketing, to communications, to HR, to sustainability, to supply chains. Many of these things are focused at the same efforts. So if you actually aggregated these budgets up and saw it as from a holistic perspective, you'd create greater efficiencies rather than parsing them out in traditional manner. And the 5 steps help to form a framework to do that. They amplify in that way impact and effectiveness of activities under the umbrella doing good. They balance profit with a responsibility to create positive impact. And importantly, they help leaders, they help brands leave a worthy legacy. So what are these 5 steps? Well, the first step is trust. Do what you say. And there's 5 steps that we uncovered that fall into trust. Clarity, which is being clear about what your purpose is. Reliability, delivering on it every time. And this is not only reliability to customers, it's reliability on your promises to your employees, to your supply chain partners, to your investors. It's reliability and following through on what you promise in your purpose in all your actions. Sincerity is very important. Sincerity is about speaking from the heart. We hear a lot about authenticity in today's world. And what I uncovered in my research, actually beginning in the mid-noughties and around 2006, 2007, when we were doing a big study with millennials for a client, was that millennials back then realized that people were, they said, curating their authenticity. They were online telling people who they were. So they were curating what was authentic to them. And people accept this as long as there's a truth in the curation. But they understand when you're speaking sincerely from the heart. So rather than always thinking about authenticity, and while the words may seem like synonyms, think about being genuine. Think about being sincere. Think about speaking from the heart, and that cultivates more trust. When we think about how businesses responded in their statements, whether it was to the onset of the pandemic and sending people home to work in their homes, or cutting off workers who could not perform work in their homes. Many of these statements felt hollow, they felt crafted, because they were. People were responding in all the same manner, but how would you as a person respond? How would that voice of the brand come across to be sincere, to cultivate trust? Reciprocity is about that notion that one of our participants in the research, the quote I mentioned, told us early on: give to give, not to get. So many loyalty programs, so many initiatives that appear that they're all about the other party are actually about what that other party is going to ultimately give you. So to cultivate trust, you need to think about giving to give, not what that giving is going to come back to you with. And that follows on with active listening. Active listening is about this notion of big data and the fact that we have all this information on people, but yet all we're doing with this information is cross-selling. We're not looking at how we use this information to give them something that would benefit them. That's not about cross-selling. So these are the important ways that you cultivate trust. The other further factor about trust that's essential is historically in reputation management, in customer satisfaction, in all things related to this, trust has been the end game. But with brand citizenship in this new world where businesses demanded to do good, trust is the starting point for a meaningful relationship with your stakeholders. In the same way, trust is the starting point for a meaningful relationship with a friend. The next step is enrichment. It's about making people's lives more inspired every day. Enrichment is your purpose in action. And whether it's your customer value proposition or your employee value proposition, enrichment is how you bring this purpose to life in your interactions with people. What we learned in the research was people identify more with brands and employers that understand the challenges they face. And this was the demand that employees have been making since the start of the pandemic. Understand what I'm going through in my home, balancing these things. Understand that I'm not yet ready to return to the office. Understand that I'm an individual, not just a number in this pool of things. So enrichment is about showing you understand, and in that understanding, you're looking to make their life a little bit easier and a little bit more inspired. What's interesting is when you see the brands that people categorize as brands of enrichment, they have interesting backstories. They focus on ethical supply chains often and often use natural ingredients. One of my favorite brands in this is IKEA. And it's because IKEA is a learning organization, and IKEA's mission drives everything they do and has very much from the beginning. I don't have time to share the story about particle glue, but IKEA learns from its mistakes over and over. And whether it was particle glue, child labor, and rugs, IKEA takes each of these lessons and sees it as a journey to better. In the same way I said, this journey that you're on for doing good is a journey to keep improving, to raise the bar. And IKEA operates in this way. And my favorite little bit about IKEA's story is their museum in Sweden, if you ever have the opportunity to go there, is not all about bragging what they've done right. IKEA is actually proud of what they did wrong and how it changed them. And that's embodied in the history they tell in this museum. Following on from enrichment is responsibility. And responsibility is the pivot point between being a me brand and a we brand. And being a me brand or a we brand is not better. One would not say a brand like IKEA or a brand like Apple, which is also a brand of enrichment, are bad brands and that they don't have elements of doing good within them, especially one like IKEA. But some brands are positioned strategically as a brand that's about individuals and helping individuals while doing good for the world. And other brands are brands that are positioned as brands doing good for the world through offering things to individuals. So responsibility is this pivot point between being me and we. And it actually encompasses most of the initial notions of what we think of as corporate social responsibility. Very importantly, beginning in 2012, people told us they would not give business credit. They would not give a company credit for the good it was doing in the environment if it did not treat its employees well and fairly. And this research was conducted in both the US and the UK at the time. And what was interesting is initially the UK, the environment came up a little bit higher than treating employees well. As the Tories came in and austerity measures came, it flipped. And employees rose again to the top. Also, early on in our research, we learned that people give brands permission to act on issues of social rights. Over time, this has extended to social justice. And in the US, it continues to expand. And right now there's a debate again about gun control, and abortion is coming into the foray. Who would have ever thought even 2 years ago that a business would be taking a stand on abortion? Things for a board to consider when it comes to responsibility are, do your values represent your operating principles, or are they words on a page? Do you take a systems perspective over stakeholder concerns? And are you cultivating a culture of responsibility? Is your relationship with management cultivating that and fostering that? Following on from responsibility, the emphasis of treating employees and suppliers well, it's logical that it's all about crafting community. The brands we choose, the employers we work for, are extensions of who we are. They act as badges to the people we interact with for what we care about. This has become increasingly important and will continue to grow. Belonging is part of community, and it's essential to achieving diversity, equity, and inclusion. Initiatives on this are often focused on building community around affinity populations. What's becoming more and more clear is that while affinity populations are great safe havens for traditionally marginalized communities, they don't create allyship. And what community needs to start doing is fostering allyship across bonds, as well as creating safe spaces for communities that have been marginalized. Importantly, community is more about things than bringing affinity groups together in social media communities. It includes B2B communities such as the Forest Stewardship Council or Fair Trade. It also demands on integrating NGOs and civil society into an inclusive purpose, into activating and actualizing your purpose. The other thing that's very important is, as you foster communities of wider groups, you can't control them. You need to facilitate them. Allow the community to develop its own way of interacting. And if you think of the board and board's relationship with management as a community, you're not looking to be controlled. So extend that into how you create communities across different aspects of your shareholders or stakeholders, apologies. And the final step of brand citizenship is contribution. Make me feel bigger than I am because of my association with you. Create positive change. It's about enriching we. Taking a systems perspective is equally as important to contribution as it is to responsibility, as is accountability and measurement. When you think of doing good, you don't think of the accountability element of it. And as I mentioned before, ESG is one way of doing this. However, it's essential to remember that ESG was designed as a measurement of risk for investors, not necessarily a measurement of impact. And I know this is a big, broad debate at the moment, and it's being played out. Many of the unified reporting initiatives are moving to address some of this. How do we elevate this? But first and foremost, they're looking to create a unified way to help communicate the risk elements within a business to investors. The brands you see that fall into this category are the well-known names, Patagonia. But let's remember, Patagonia didn't start as a brand out there for social activism. It became that over time and actually changed its mission over time to reflect what was inspiring them within their business. You don't have to be a brand that's all about doing good as Patagonia is today. Kenko Coffee, which is owned by Mondelez, has an initiative that people associate with doing good. It's a coffee and gangs program, which is focused on improving the lives of Honduran teens. And there's a lot more about that, but unfortunately, I don't have time to share that with you. But you can be a traditional brand in a large conglomerate and be about contribution. As the global pandemic spotlighted deep-rooted systemic issues, what we discovered in the course of all our investigations, and this is not a surprise when you step back and think about it for a moment, is that responsibility, community, and contribution are essential today for cultivating trust. You cannot be thought of as a business, as a brand of trust, or that will be trusted, unless you actually are taking actions in these areas. So brand citizenship, it's a doing good mindset, a new model for doing business, a necessary shift in consciousness. And I would say a shift in consciousness is an essential element as we look into the journey of moving forward in this new world. So what are the key takeaways for you as a board? What things should you reflect on? What I've done here is I'm sharing some questions that often come into interactions I have with clients, whether it's one-on-one interviews, working sessions, or other things. These are things we like to start thinking about. Do you have a broader strategic definition of doing good? Does that notion of doing good as an integrative set of activities fit with you? Does your leadership team and your brand embody the characteristics of trust? Do you come from a place of humility? Do your customer and employee value propositions represent your purpose and action? Do your values translate into operating principles, or are they simply words on a page? Operating principles are values in action. And when you talk to employees, they seem to relate more to these because it helps them to guide their day-to-day actions. Values are often bigger things that people have, I don't know what to do with this. So just developing a purpose with values and things like that without turning it into how you operate, how these things turn into day-to-day actions in a business, actually may check the box, but it's not going to change the behavior or transform the business. And is your purpose cultivating cross-functional engagement? Not only important for the way people interact in a business, but it's essential to create efficiencies and be more effective in your impact. Have you taken a wider systems perspective when identifying stakeholders and their concerns? Peter Senge is the person who popularized and defined a systems perspective, and it's essential to look beyond the immediate system of your industry, of your sector, of your business when doing this. Are you cultivating a sustainability mindset of ethos of citizenship, or do you limit responsible culture? Do you consider yourself being responsible if you're solely in legal compliance? Are you fostering an inclusive purpose journey that integrates NGOs and civil society? Do you position ESG reporting as a measurement of risk for investors or an assessment of broader impact? Or is it really the former and you're pretending it's the latter? And then how do you define success? Importantly, are your sustainability and do good targets on par with your financial measurements and market share when you as the board evaluate the business? That's it. Thank you.
Oh, this was so interesting to follow. I thank you very much for that. So we are going to jump into some questions. So as I move into this, or as we move into this area, if you have any questions that you think of, just plug them into the Q&A area here. So let's see where we're going to start. I see a few good ones. I'm going to start with this here. Is there a way to take a stand on social issues that doesn't alienate audiences?
So that's a question that's coming up more and more these days. And I would say taking a stand by nature will alienate some people. There's no way to avoid that. Not everyone defines doing good in the same way. Yet in a social world, declaring a position places a brand in control of its own fate, of its own story. Remaining silent can easily be seen, and has been seen more and more time and time again, as endorsing the status quo. People see through crafted rhetoric, as I spoke about, being sincere, over being authentic. People see through this crafted rhetoric. So to minimize backlash and not violate trust, it's crucial that when you take a stand, if you do decide to do so, make sure your house is in order. The things that come out at these moments are really frightening. And the minute you do take a stand, activists will be performing an autopsy on everything you do, because they will be looking to create your death. And I would say, although taking a stand may lead to alienating half your target market, and I've been involved in many discussions about this, and it's a big issue right now in the more senior marketing community. Do we alienate most of our target audience? Employees are demanding that people do this more and more. And that becomes an essential factor in doing it. I would also say that business has been segmenting target audiences first on demographics, then on psychographics, and then fine-tuning psychographics into lifestyle. If you think about it, taking a stand is a reflection of lifestyle. So in some ways, as difficult as it may be, is the next generation of market segmentation.
Oh, thank you very much. Does every brand, every company have to be known for contribution?
You don't have to be known as a brand that's about contribution, but you have to embrace the elements of contribution in your activities. American brands such as Warby Parker or Tom's are the big ones that come to mind, in addition to Patagonia. There's a German clothing company, Giotti, which also is a brand that's known for contribution. It provides employment for people from marginalized and disadvantaged groups in India. And then there's another company, Nikken. A lot of these are fashion companies which plant a tree every time you purchase a product. But these brands don't have to be thought of brands that are doing good. Think about Lego. In people's minds, Lego is a toy company that enriches people's minds. Yet Lego's whole aim right now is a sustainable future, as well as bettering children's minds and people's minds globally. CBRE, which is an American commercial real estate company, if you look at it more on a B2B end, has many initiatives that make people feel like they're doing good through affiliation with them. They've launched a Green Machine campaign to plant 1 million trees and have a series of other initiatives. And I'm trying to avoid going to the Scandi nations, especially because red comes from there. But if you look across Scandinavia, there are countless examples of brands that are thought of as contributing to society, but actually are about their business.
Great. No, it's so interesting to hear your take on that. You didn't speak much about purpose. How important is it really to corporate strategy? And is it really to corporate strategy? And if a board should be involved in defining and deploying it? Would you share some more information?
Sure. And purpose is another one of those large words that's a bit fraught with multiple definitions. Purpose is the reason a business exists. It's not a social mission. And that gets confused very easily. And if a business has defined its purpose as a social mission, it's actually setting itself up to be a social enterprise. So a for-profit business, your purpose is about what you're in business to do, but it has to be broad enough. It has to encompass human truths wide enough that allow you to associate a social mission with them. Doing good is not about your favorite charities. And that's something that a lot of people are challenged with. And I don't say this derogatorily, especially as a woman, but we often find sometimes, especially working with privately held companies, that's often the case. It's about their favorite charities and what their wives want them to invest in. But purpose is this larger notion of why you're in business, and it's a foundation, it's a filter that guides all your actions and behaviors. It's the core reason for being of your company. With respect to the board's role in developing purpose really depends upon the organization. I find developing purpose very similar to developing and refreshing a brand with an organization, and the two generally are very tied together. In some organizations, board members are interviewed during this process of development. In others, they're just kept abreast. In some, they're part of workshops and working sessions, and others, they just get the end presentation. The board, though, does have a role in executing purpose in the same way it has a role in executing do good and executing sustainability. It's to ensure that the management team is acknowledging and planning for the issues this implies are part of business strategy. and the potential value or loss of value if not planning for these things. And this is where having a wider systems perspective actually comes very much into play.
Mm. Very, very good. I have a little bit of a personal question for you. How did you initially get so passionate about this field?
Well, in some ways, on reflection, I probably was passionate about alignment of business with what they say since I was a young child. When I was 9 years old, I wrote a letter to Crest, which P&G owns, toothpaste, because they had a commercial in which the pharmacist had on his shelf all these different toothpastes. And I should clarify this or qualify this first with the fact that I come from a very scientific family. I have an uncle who was nominated for Nobel Prizes multiple times. My father has multiple degrees in engineering. So I don't come from a family of business and advertising. But yet I noticed that on the shelf, there were multiple toothpastes, and Mr. Goodwin only wanted people to buy Crest. And I wrote a letter to P&G and said, I don't understand, why does he carry other toothpastes? So in many ways, it began when I was 9, before I even knew this stuff existed. I didn't understand why his business wasn't in alignment with what he was trying to sell people.
Right.
But actually, it came about in the way it is today, accidentally. The research we were doing at the end of 2011, when I moved back to the US after living more than a decade in Europe or in the UK, people were saying that business needed to step in and reform society. They didn't feel that business had an opposing force in the way politicians do. They didn't have an opposing party. But actually, very relevant to this, what they didn't realize is that an opposing force for management can be the board, and an opposing force for the board can be management. So business does have an opposing force, but in a way that's different from politicians. Yeah. So I got into this because it was an important issue to the development of brands. And not surprisingly, it also fit with some of my personal values. But it wasn't because I decided, let's wake up today and develop a model for purpose. And why brand citizenship makes sense and has helped many executives, boards, many brands develop a new framework for looking at things. And it's not an end all to be all. It's not a rigid way. It's just a framework to help start putting things in context. And why it makes sense is because it's what people told us. It comes from clustering results of research. So it's from the grassroots up. It wasn't something that we decided, let's come up with our model for this.
Oh, it's always so interesting to hear. I have one more question here. What is your take on the go woke, go broke statement? It seems that companies bring unwanted issues on themselves when taking a political or social stand.
And I think that goes back to that issue of how can you take a stand without actually polarizing people. I think go woke, go broke is an extreme example. And I think it often comes from companies who are being opportunists. And they see an opportunity and we're going to dive in there. And it actually is not the right thing because it's not in alignment with what they're about. I think, go woke is such, it's such a, that in and of itself is a hotbed comment and a polarizing issue. I don't think this is about being woke, to be honest. Maybe it is about waking up to what people are wanting, but it's actually just operating in the best interests of what your employees, your customers, your supply chain, what people are demanding of you. If you go back to Peter Drucker, who's a management guru, and look at what he says, Peter Drucker is best known for the purpose of a business is to create a customer. However, Peter Drucker also says businesses operate with permission from society to manage their resources to create a customer. So if in service to creating a customer, you have to manage society's resources. You have to start thinking of going woke as not this whole thing about political correctness. It's about actually being a responsible business and ensuring you're sustainable as a business. And I don't mean sustainable and green. I mean sustainable as an ongoing entity.
Sure. Oh, it's super interesting. And this was, for me, very interesting to hear. And a lot of it I have not been familiar with. whether it's on a personal level or business professionally. So I hope many that joined us today feel the same. So we are going to move into our, I don't want to say end, but towards the end of our program. So let's see here if we can get this so that everyone can see this. And here we go. So, and first of all, thank you so much, obviously, for your details and insight in this on this topic. It was super interesting, so I appreciate that very much. For anyone who would like to contact Anne, you have the means to do so in the presentation that everyone will receive shortly. And for further information or to schedule a demo or access your free 14-day ShapeParency test drive, you can do that at shapeparency.com. You can also enroll in our global board education and certification course hosted by our education partner, and that is at shapeparency.com/board education. And for information on our upcoming events, which the upcoming one is with Mark Pfister and how to package yourself and get board ready. So anything of our events is on shapeparency.com/events. We thank you very much, Anne, for being part of this with us, and we thank everyone who has attended today. We hope you have a good day or evening, and we'll see you again soon.